breathe the flame of Florida, and he's chasing heiresses in Brazil and crashing planes and doing stuff we'd all like to do. He describes that as, well, it was fun, etc., but when I went into prison in Hanoi, I thought that willful individualism was the ticket to glory, that all glory was self-glory, that egotism, narcissism, and those of you who've read the big blue book of Alcoholics Anonymous will start to recognize some of the language here. These are the enemies. And he only found out when he was broken in Vietnam, as all POWs, with one or two exceptions, were broken at some point, and everyone in this room would break, and I certainly would break in about 10 seconds. When he broke, the lesson that he took out of it was my willful individualism, my selfishness, my narcissism reached its ceiling. It was a ceiling on my greatness. And it was only afterwards, when he was at his lowest of the lows, that he realized that it was faith in a greater cause, a cause greater than yourself, a higher collective of U.S. nationalism, that could bring him back to life, and that became the object of his intentions with the government. It's a very stirring and interesting story. This all happens in 97, 98. It's pretty interesting, a collection of things. What else happens? He goes from the guy who in 1994 says, the worst thing that I can imagine is our boys in the former Yugoslavia, to the guy in 1999 who says that not only do we need to support President Clinton's bombing of Kosovo, which is an intervention, by the way, which had much less international and legal justification than the invasion of Iraq ever did. We need to not only support the bombing, but it's going to be a catastrophe unless we don't get the maximum number of U.S. boots on the ground. Suddenly, he was applying the Powell doctrine of overwhelming force, but without the Powell skepticism about the use of force. Around this time, 1999, he delivered a speech that I encourage all of you to read. It's still chilling all of these years later in Kansas State University, in which he unveiled a doctrine that he called rogue state rollback. Rollback is an interesting phrase. It was all the rage in the 50s. Serious conservatives who thought Eisenhower was a big sellout wanted the U.S. to roll back communist Russia or the communist Soviet Union, and everywhere they saw communism, roll that back. McCain in 1999 said that anywhere we see an authoritarian dictator, and he named Iraq, Iran, Syria, North Korea, Burma, other countries, we should be supporting the freedom fighters and the insurgents, and when they inevitably get cracked down, we need to back that up with U.S. force. Anytime we make a threat, we need to back that up with maximum force. He lamented in this speech that we didn't get into a war with North Korea when we had the opportunity in 1994. It's a very expansionist idea about the projection of U.S. power. And it is a speech and a doctrine that we all recognize 3 years later when Bush came up with the doctrine of preemptive war. Since that moment, since 98, 99, McCain has been a consistent interventionist and reverting, in my analysis of it, to the person that he was growing up, basically. At the end of Faith in My Fathers, it's a moment when I didn't really recognize the significance when I first read it, but when I listened to the books on tape, when his voice kind of like gets into it at the parts that he writes instead of Mark Salter, his co-writer, he talked about how Vietnam shook the country. It made us doubt ourselves and doubt the use of American power abroad. Thankfully, those days are behind us, and now we can go forward. That is where McCain is today. Anywhere you see analysis of his foreign policy that doesn't take that into account, take it with a dose of skepticism. Especially now, as I had mentioned, he has this huge challenge of trying to keep this room, in particular, a bunch of Democrats and independents. There's not any Republicans in here. But he needs to keep this room believing that because his heart is in the right place, because he is, in Michael Lewis's famous words, one of us. There was actually a great critique of the fact that the national journalists loved McCain in the 90s, and local journalists in Arizona all hated his guts because they'd been tangling with him and been the recipients of a lot of McCain outbursts. And Michael Lewis said, well, I don't know why you'd think the Arizona journalists would know him better. I mean, McCain's from Washington. He's one of us. But because people think that they are going to give him the benefit of the doubt, and he's going to be spending the next 6 to 7 months maintaining a foreign policy team led by a guy who started the Committee to Liberate Iraq, Randy Scheunemann, marinating in these sort of national greatness conservatism, which is a explicitly anti-isolationist, anti-libertarian strain of conservatism, while not getting called on it, because he needs your vote.